Courtroom confrontation. Do you recognize this man, Mrs. Watson? I'm standing in a federal courtroom, my hands slightly trembling as I point toward Richard Collins, the man who 6 months ago looked at me with such disdain while sliding a manila folder across his polished desk. Yes, I say, my voice steadier than I feel. That's Richard Collins, former operations director at New Venture Technologies. The courtroom falls silent. Jurors lean forward. Richard's attorney shifts uncomfortably. Richard himself, once so confident in his tailored suits and expensive watches, now looks small, diminished. He avoids my gaze. And could you tell the court what Mr. Collins did on April 12th of this year? I take a deep breath. He fired me 3 days before my pension would fully vest. After 29 years and 362 days of service. As I speak these words, I'm transported back to that rainy Friday afternoon when my life changed forever. Not just because of what was taken from me, but because of what I chose to do about it. My name is Margaret Watson, Maggie to most, and this is how I became a whistleblower at 61 years old. Determination. How long have you been with us, Maggie? 29 years, isn't it? Richard Collins leaned back in his leather chair that Friday afternoon, his voice unnervingly casual. I remember straightening my back slightly. 29 years and 362 days, to be exact. As I spoke, I caught sight of the manila folder on his desk, and something cold settled in my stomach. In all my years at New Venture Technologies, I'd never been called into a director's office on a Friday afternoon. The April rain tapped against the window, creating a soundtrack to my rising anxiety. Due to budget constraints, we're letting you go. His eyes never met mine. Effective immediately. The room seemed to tilt. Budget constraints? The company had just announced record profits last quarter. This is your severance package. He tapped the folder with his manicured finger. Sign by tomorrow, or get nothing. HR will escort you to clean out your desk. I should have felt shocked, perhaps even the urge to plead. But instead, a strange calm washed over me. I'd spent my career examining patterns, and this one was clear as day. This wasn't random. This was calculated, precisely timed to fall before my pension vested. Thank you for the opportunity, I said quietly, picking up the folder without opening it. Richard looked surprised by my composure, perhaps expecting tears or protests. That would have pleased him, I think, to see me break. Men like Richard, I've learned, feed on the vulnerability of others. The drive home. The drive home felt surreal. 30 years of dedication ended with a manila folder and a cardboard box. The rain had intensified, mirroring the storm building inside me. I passed St. Mary's Cathedral where Daniel and I had married 35 years ago. I could almost see us, younger, hopeful, certain that dedication and hard work would always be rewarded. Daniel had been gone for 12 years now, but in that moment, I missed him with a fresh intensity. What would you tell me to do, Daniel? I whispered to the empty car. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made for New Venture. The missed recitals during those early years, the family vacations cut short, the countless evenings spent reviewing documentation. When Laura was 15, she'd stopped asking me to attend her school events. I know you're busy, Mom, she'd say, her voice carefully neutral. It had hurt, but I told myself I was building security for our future. I pulled into my driveway and sat quietly, allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The years of commitment. The promises made by the company. The calculated timing of my dismissal. For the first time since leaving the office, I let the tears come. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, finally opening the severance package. The terms were insulting. 3 months' salary in exchange for waiving all rights to future claims against the company. No pension. No healthcare continuation. No acknowledgement of nearly 3 decades of service. Just a check and a legal trap designed to silence me. The document required my signature by 5 p.m. tomorrow. They were counting on fear and desperation to make me sign quickly, without consulting anyone. I set the papers aside and walked to my home office. Behind a row of family photo albums sat a fireproof lockbox, my insurance policy. For 4 years, I'd been bringing home copies of troubling financial documents, keeping detailed notes of conversations and saving emails that outlined patterns of misconduct. Not because I planned to use them, but because my professional instincts told me something wasn't right. I opened the box and spread the contents across my desk. Loan applications with falsified data, quarterly reports with manipulated figures, emails instructing staff to backdate quality control certifications. Over 1,000 pages of evidence showing systematic fraud that had accelerated under Richard's direction. My fingers brushed across a memo from 2 years ago. I had flagged numerous discrepancies in the quarterly report, but Richard's predecessor had dismissively told me to focus on compliance, not accounting. 6 months later, he was promoted to the board, and Richard was brought in to streamline operations, corporate speak for cutting corners and boosting short-term gains. I picked up my phone, scrolling to a contact I hadn't called in years, Michael Freeman. He had been New Venture's chief financial officer before leaving to work for the Securities and Exchange Commission. He'd always respected my diligence, even when others found it tedious. It's time, I thought, as my finger hovered over his name. Flashback. My early years, before I called Michael, I found myself staring at an old photograph on my desk. My parents standing outside their small convenience store in 1972. They'd worked 14-hour days, 7 days a week, to put me through college. Always do what's right, Margaret, my father would say. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I was the first in my family to graduate college, and when I joined New Venture Technologies in 1994, my parents had been so proud. A stable job with benefits and a pension, it represented security they had never known. I remembered my father's voice at my wedding. Daniel's a good man, Maggie. He sees your worth. Daniel had been an English teacher who believed in public service. He never made much money, but he changed lives. When he died of a heart attack 12 years ago, over 200 former students attended his funeral. After his death, I threw myself even more into my work. It was easier than facing the empty house, easier than acknowledging that Laura was grown and gone, building her own life in Chicago. The company became my anchor, my identity. I believed in what we were building, or what I thought we were building. That belief now felt like a cruel joke. The decision, Michael answered on the third ring. Maggie Watson? It's been years. How are you? 2 hours later, I had told him everything, the termination, the pension, the evidence I'd collected over 4 years. His response was measured but resolute. This isn't just wrongful termination, Maggie. Based on what you're describing, New Venture could be facing serious securities violations. The timing with your pension, that's just the tip of the iceberg. He explained the whistleblower protections available through the SEC and arranged for me to meet with his team on Monday morning. Warning. Don't sign anything, he cautioned, and secure those documents somewhere safe. The decision continued after we hung up. I sat in the dark living room, questioning myself. Was I doing this for justice or for revenge? Was I betraying a company I'd served for 30 years? Or was I finally fulfilling my true professional obligation? I thought about Richard Collins. He joined the company just 6 months ago, but I'd seen his type before. Ambitious, charming to superiors, dismissive of anyone he deemed expendable. At our first meeting, he checked his watch 3 times in 20 minutes. When I raised concerns about the latest cost-cutting measures, he'd interrupted. Times change, Mrs. Watson. We need people who can adapt. The subtext was clear. He saw me as outdated, a relic. Not worth listening to. My phone rang. Laura's weekly call. I considered deflecting, giving a sanitized version of my week as I often did. But tonight felt different. Mom, what's going on? She asked after just a few exchanges. You sound different. I was terminated yesterday, I said simply. What? But you're just days away from your full pension. They can't do that. They did, I replied. But don't worry. I'm handling it. Do you need me to come home? I can be on a flight from Chicago tomorrow. No, sweetheart, stay put. I've got this covered. After we hung up, I realized something had shifted within me. For years, I'd tried to address these issues internally, believing in the system and the company's integrity. I'd been loyal, discreet, and professional, even when I suspected serious wrongdoing. But New Venture had made its choice, and now I would make mine. I would not be signing their agreement. I would not be silenced. And most importantly, I would not let them discard 3 decades of my life without consequence. The whistleblower laws existed for exactly this reason. Not to punish companies, but to protect the market and innocent people from fraud. People like my parents, who'd invested their small savings believing in this system's fairness. Monday couldn't come soon enough. The SEC meeting Monday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I dressed carefully, placed my documentation in a secure briefcase, and drove downtown to the federal building. The weight of what I was about to do sat heavily on my shoulders, but there was also a sense of rightness to it all. The SEC offices were understated but imposing. Michael met me in the lobby, his familiar face lined with more years but still carrying the sharp intelligence I remembered. "Maggie," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." He led me to a conference room where 2 other investigators waited: Samantha Chen, a senior enforcement attorney, and Robert Campbell, a forensic accountant. "Mrs. Watson," Samantha began, "before we start, I want to confirm that you understand the process we're initiating today. Once you share this information with us, an investigation becomes official. There's no turning back." I nodded. "I understand completely." For the next 3 hours, I walked them through my documentation, the irregular financial reporting I'd first noticed 4 years ago, the quality control certifications backdated after products had already been shipped, the pattern of revenue manipulation that had intensified after Richard's arrival. Robert examined the financial documents with growing concern. "These discrepancies aren't small. The company has been systematically overstating revenues by at least 18% for the past 2 years. And you reported these issues internally?" Samantha asked. "Multiple times," I confirmed, showing them copies of my memos and emails. Each time, I was told the issues were being addressed or that I was misinterpreting the data. When Richard joined 6 months ago, my concerns started being rerouted to his office, where they disappeared entirely. Michael leaned forward. "And you believe your termination was directly related to these reports?" "Without question. The timing, 3 days before my pension vested, makes it obvious. But more than that, I had recently flagged several major issues with Richard's latest cost-cutting initiative. He needed me gone before I could escalate further." As our meeting concluded, Samantha outlined the next steps. I left feeling both lighter and heavier, lighter for having finally shared the truth, heavier knowing what would come next. The company's response. I hadn't even returned home when my phone rang. It was Carol from HR, her voice trembling. "Maggie, something's happening. The board just called an emergency meeting. Richard's been locked in his office all morning, and there are rumors about SEC investigators contacting our general counsel." So it had begun, faster than I anticipated. "I'm not surprised," I said calmly. "Did you?" Carol hesitated. "Maggie, did you report something?" "I simply did what I should have done years ago," I replied. "What's happening with my pension paperwork?" "That's why I'm calling. The executive committee is reviewing your termination. They put everything on hold until further notice." Within hours, the chairman of the board, James Morrison, called me directly, a man who had barely acknowledged my existence during our few previous interactions. "Miss Watson," he said, his typically confident voice sounding strained, "we seem to have a situation that requires your input. Would you be willing to come to the office tomorrow morning to discuss matters?" "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Morrison," I replied. "Any discussions should include my attorney and potentially representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission." "I'm sure you understand." The silence on the other end was profound. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I see. Perhaps we can arrange something more formal then." As I hung up, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep weariness at the necessity of it all. I had never wanted to be a whistleblower. I had only wanted to do my job with integrity and retire with the security I'd earned. The media battle. By Wednesday morning, the storm had fully broken. Local business publications ran headlines about a SEC investigation into New Venture Technologies, sending the company's stock into a tailspin. I received a formal letter from New Venture's legal department, withdrawing my termination notice and placing me on administrative leave with full benefits pending an internal review, a transparent attempt to mitigate damages, coming far too late. But Richard was fighting back. That evening, I was stunned to see an interview with him in the business section of the local paper. He claimed I had performance issues and was bitter about being passed over for promotion. He portrayed me as a disgruntled employee retaliating because of personal grievances. The accusations stung in a way I hadn't anticipated. For 3 decades, I had built my reputation on integrity and professionalism. Now, in a matter of days, Richard was attempting to destroy that. I called my attorney, Susan Kramer. "Don't respond to any of it," she advised. "The SEC will issue a statement tomorrow clarifying your whistleblower status and the credibility of your evidence. Let the official channels handle this." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my kitchen window, watching the rain again just as it had rained the day I was fired. I thought about Richard Collins, wondering what had shaped him into the man he was. During one of our few interactions, he'd mentioned growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut, the son of a hedge fund manager. "My father always said business is about winning, no matter the cost," he told me once, almost proudly. I wondered if he truly believed that, or if he was simply parroting values he'd been taught without questioning them. Either way, the damage he'd done was real. The unexpected allies. What happened next caught me completely off guard. On Thursday morning, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found Carol from HR standing there, looking nervous but determined. "I shouldn't be here," she said quickly, "but I had to come. I have something you need to see." She handed me a USB drive. "It's the original performance evaluations Richard ordered us to modify after you were terminated. There are also emails where he specifically asked about the timing of your pension vesting." I invited her in, made tea, and listened as she explained how uncomfortable many employees had been with my termination and the subsequent character assassination. "People respected you, Maggie, more than you know." Later that day, 2 other colleagues contacted me, offering to provide statements about the financial irregularities they'd witnessed. One of them, a junior accountant named Jason, admitted he'd been told to adjust figures by Richard directly, with the threat that team players get promoted, others get noticed for the wrong reasons. This unexpected solidarity touched me deeply. For years, I'd felt increasingly isolated at work, the aging compliance officer that younger executives sidestepped or humored. Now I was discovering that many had valued my role, even when they hadn't spoken up. The board meeting. The following week, with my attorney Susan beside me, I attended a meeting at New Venture's headquarters. The same security guard who had escorted me out on Friday now nodded respectfully as we entered. We were shown to the main boardroom, where James Morrison waited with the company's outside counsel and 3 other board members. Richard was conspicuously absent. "Thank you for coming, Miss Watson," James began, seeming to have aged years in just a few days. "We've initiated a comprehensive internal investigation into the concerns you've raised." Susan spoke before I could respond. "Let's be clear about something, Mr. Morrison. Miss Watson didn't suddenly raise these concerns after her termination. She documented and reported them repeatedly over a period of 4 years, as her job required her to do. The company's decision to ignore those reports and then to terminate her days before her pension vested speaks volumes." James shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, well, that's part of what we're investigating. I want to personally assure Miss Watson that her termination has been rescinded. We consider her an employee in good standing with all benefits intact, including my pension?" I asked directly. "Of course," he replied quickly. "In fact, we're prepared to offer you a consulting role after your retirement, which you can begin immediately if you wish. We value your expertise." I remained mostly silent during the meeting, letting Susan handle the legal maneuvering while I observed their body language. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, yet they'd never truly seen me until now. As we prepared to leave, James made one final appeal. "Maggie, we're hoping you might consider speaking with the SEC investigators about the corrective actions we're taking. Your support would be invaluable." I looked at him directly. "Mr. Morrison, I've spent 29 years dedicated to this company's compliance. During that time, I filed 47 major reports documenting serious irregularities. I sent 16 memos specifically addressing the issues now under investigation. I requested 9 meetings with executive leadership to discuss these concerns, of which only 2 were granted, and neither resulted in action. At what point in that history did I have your support? The room fell silent. I'll cooperate fully with both the internal investigation and the I continued. But I'll be speaking only to the facts, as I always have. Whether those facts support or damage New Venture will depend entirely on what you do next, not what you say in this room. The reckoning. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom watching as Richard Collins and 2 former board members entered guilty pleas to securities fraud charges. The man who had so casually ended my career now looked diminished in his dark suit, his arrogance replaced by defeat. Our eyes met briefly as he turned to leave. In that moment, I saw recognition there, not of me specifically, but of what I represented, the consequences of his actions personified. The New Venture scandal had become a case study in corporate governance failures and the crucial role of internal compliance. The SEC had awarded me a substantial whistleblower payment, 15% of the penalties assessed against the company. Combined with my pension and the settlement, I had more financial security than I'd ever imagined possible. I'd established a scholarship fund for women pursuing careers in corporate ethics and compliance, naming it after Daniel. Laura had relocated to St. Paul to be closer to me, bringing my 2 grandchildren with her. Epilogue. 1 year later, I stand at a podium in a university auditorium, looking out at faces much younger than mine. The business ethics professor had invited me to speak about my experience as a whistleblower, and the room is surprisingly full. People often ask if I regret staying at New Venture for 30 years. Given how it ended, I tell them, I don't. I regret that exposing the truth became necessary, but I don't regret my work there. Integrity isn't just about being honest when it's easy. It's about maintaining your principles, especially when it costs you something. After the lecture, a woman in her 50s approaches me. I've been with my company for 22 years, she says quietly. I've seen things. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to speak up. As I drive home, I pass St. Mary's Cathedral again, thinking of Daniel. You'd be proud, I whisper. It took me 61 years, but I finally understood what you and Dad were trying to teach me, that doing the right thing is its own reward. At home, my grandchildren are waiting. The 7-year-old runs to me, holding up a half-finished knit scarf, our latest project together. Grandma, I did 3 rows all by myself. I hug her tightly, this child who will grow up knowing her grandmother not just as someone who worked hard, but as someone who stood up for what was right. And in that moment, I know with absolute certainty that all the difficult choices, all the sleepless nights, all the uncertainty, it was all worth it. Not for the settlement or the vindication, but for this, the freedom to finally be fully present in my own life without compromise. That night, as I tucked my grandchildren into bed, the younger one asked me to tell them a story. Once upon a time, I begin, there was a woman who thought her value came from what she did, not who she was. And as I continue the story, I realize I'm finally at peace, not because I won, but because I chose truth, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard.